Just for inconvenience. But that's what we are. We are servants, which means sometimes our master calls for service, and so we jump. In a lot of ways, I was thinking about while I was on the altar, but it's a lot like the Gita. You don't always get a chance to plan it all out, figure it all out. Sometimes it just happens. And there's people who are spontaneous and they like to jump at a moment's notice that gives them some excitement in life. And then there's people who don't like to do that. And to some extent, it's like it's irrelevant. Some people say, "Oh, I don't like to chant." Well, it's like, tough luck. You join the Hare Krishna movement. We chant. It's what we do. Or I don't like to be sober. Yeah, tough luck. That's our jam too. We're sober. And so, some people might not like to be spontaneous and have to jump at a moment's notice and be of service, but if you're a servant and your master calls, then if that's who you are, that's how you conceive of yourself, then your psychophysical nature or your age or whatever it might be, it's just not really significant. And so you do what you're required to do, make sure the service goes on, you put stuff on your shoulders, you keep walking. I got hypoglycemic because I haven't had any simple carbohydrates in a bunch of hours, and all my glycogen stores are depleted, so I was having to preach to myself to keep going. Like the way when you're running a race and you're like, there's just 1 mile left, just half a mile left, you can do it, keep going. You kind of talk yourself through it. So I was having to do that. I hope I can serve like this until I die. And so it's not, maybe not all of us are pujaris, but then maybe we're garbage men, or we're cooks, or we're managers, or we clean the bathrooms, or we make garlands, or whatever it might be. Ideally, we should be versatile. We should be able to do a number of things for Krishna, for the temple, for the community. But we should look forward to the days where we're forced to stretch beyond our comfort zone and go the extra mile and prove that that our desire to serve is sincere, and our desire to be I'm thinking of terms like the bulwark, or which is a defensive wall, or the thin red line, which was a term used for the British military, who was able to sometimes win even though they were hopelessly outnumbered. It was just a thin red line. Or they talk about the thin blue line, that's the police officers. So however you want to frame it, if you want to really serve Krishna, if you really want to be a devotee, then it means that you are prepared to be of service whenever and forever. And a lot of times the service that you render is the service that's required. Sometimes you might get to do your favorite service. Sometimes you may not. To a large extent, that's kind of irrelevant. You do the service that's required. The person who determines the service you do is Krishna, not you. And so you serve as you're needed, as you're instructed, in the capacity that your elders or the deities or circumstance puts you in, and you just make it happen. And you think, oh, I haven't had my, I need to replenish my glycogen stores, or I'm dehydrated, or I need to take a shower, or I need some me time. That stuff doesn't really count. That stuff's not really relevant. Someday you're going to have to serve Krishna while you die. You're not going to be able to breathe, and you're going to have to think of Krishna. Do you understand, Hector? What do I mean?
We have to think about Krishna in every situation, no matter how hard it is.
Someday you're going to get old, if you're lucky, and die. That means you're going to be gasping for breath, and you're going to be unable to breathe, and your heart's going to give out, and you're going to die. Your body's going to give out, and you're going to fade away. And you're going to have to think of Krishna then. Do you get it now?
Yeah.
Did you get it before?
Yeah.
Didn't sound like it. And so whatever difficulty we go through now pales in comparison to the difficulty that we are all going to go through in due course of time. If you want to be a devotee and you want to win the race and you want to be a champion and you want to finish strong, then we have to look forward to the opportunities we have to stretch beyond our comfort zones and go the extra mile now. You want to be a professional devotee, then pros play hurt. They learn to make do, they learn to get the job done. They're more focused on the solution than they are on their comfort zone. And so, your shoulder hurts while you're dressing the deity. Great, and I get to show Krishna how much I care. That even though my shoulder hurts, I'm still dressing deities. And even though I'm dehydrated, I'm still taking care of my service. And even though I have to do A, B, or C, or I'm stressed out, every time I get a chance to put Krishna first, I try to organize my life where I'm not run ragged. But no matter how well you organize your life, if you actually make yourself available for service, things will happen that require you to stretch yourself beyond your comfort zone. And if you can't do that, then at best you're a part-time devotee. Part-time devotees don't go back to Godhead. Full-time devotees go back to Godhead. And full-time means every moment. And so if it's every moment, for sure it's every circumstance. And for sure stuff is going to happen to break you and bend you and crush you and melt you and mold you if you let it. And so we should always cultivate this attitude that I want to be there, I want to serve, I want to be there for Krishna, I want Krishna to be able to depend on me, I want the deities to be able to depend on me, I want the devotees to be able to depend on me. What I have, I'm ready to give that. And of course, if you have this mentality, if you cultivate this attitude, if you become a real devotee, a full-time devotee, and that doesn't mean you live in an ashram per se, but it does mean that you conceive of yourself as first and foremost being Krishna's servant, that's your main gig in life. That's who you are. Everything else is a side project. Who am I? I'm a devotee. That's my self-identity. That's who I am. When you strip away all that I'm not, or all the part-time stuff, or all the stuff I'm doing today but I might not be doing 5 years from now, and we're left with the bare bones, what is never going to change about my life, I'm never going to stop being a devotee. I'm never going to stop trying to serve Krishna. I'm never going to stop living my life for the purpose of making Krishna smile, which means making the devotees smile and making the deities smile. It's pretty simple. Our whole temple culture is set up. There's a set of deities. They require service all the time. Your whole life ends up, revolving around a set of deities. Even you just come to the temple once a week, it doesn't matter. You have to stay pure and follow the principles and chant your rounds. When you come to the temple, you can do service, and you're practicing what kirtan you're going to lead, or you're getting ready to cook, and you're keeping your home clean, you're keeping your car clean so you can come and cook, or whatever it might be. There's a million services devotees do, but the whole temple culture is designed to give you a focal point for your week. And mostly devotees end up coming to the temple several times a week, and stuff always comes up. Stuff always comes up, and if you make it that's who you are, and you cultivate that mentality, then Krishna does the same thing for you. And Krishna, in a miraculous and powerful way, regularly manifests in your life in a way that defies and goes beyond all logic. And Krishna appears to you and blesses you and carries you and helps you and makes miracles occur, and then lets you see that miracles are occurring. And so we got to cultivate the one side, which is our part of the equation, that I'm a servant, this is what I'm here for, this is who I am. But because Krishna is so wonderful, Krishna has the same feeling towards you, and if you open that door where you're there for Krishna in every circumstance, it opens the door for him to be there for you in every circumstance in a way that you can understand, in a very direct way. Krishna's always there for everybody. But if you're not so directly there for Krishna at every moment, then he can only indirectly be there for you. But when you get to a place where you want to directly be available, directly put yourself in harm's way, directly go out of your way, directly be uncomfortable, and that's your happy place, then Krishna is able to do the same kind of thing for you, and you end up immersed in grace, surrounded by, embraced with mercy. And really, in a lot of ways, that was Arjuna's circumstance that he found himself in. It was a call to action. He had no choice. It wasn't the way he wanted it. In a lot of ways, the Gita is about Arjuna just wrapping his head around what Krishna wants him to do and getting to a place in his life where he's able to just do the right thing, do what Krishna wants, do what's right. It's logical, it's reasonable, it makes sense. It's not some crazy thing like kill your children. It's not a Cain and Abel type situation. Not Cain and Abel, Abraham and Isaac, excuse me. It's not a kill your son for no good reason situation. It's Abraham and Isaac, right? You what?
I didn't listen at Torah Center.
Okay, it's Abraham and Isaac, unless somebody corrects me. It's not a situation where God's telling you to kill your child for no good reason. We're not getting that kind of a situation. The Gita was a just battle. It was the right thing to do. It was a duty-based ethic mixed with virtue. It's a strong moral platform to stand on. And sometimes it's not pretty, sometimes it's not easy, sometimes it's hard. None of it's going to be harder than dying. We think, oh, it's too much for me. It's like, you know what's going to be too much for you? Dying. Getting old, senile, and then dying. That's going to really suck. You think it's hard to get up early or stay up late or chant your rounds or do some service or follow the principles. You know what's really going to be hard to do? Die. Dying's going to be really hard to do. Whatever you go through in this world is just a warm-up to what death is going to look like. And we don't want to die in our sleep, neither. We're not looking for the easy way out. We want to be chanting when we die. We want to be meditating on Krishna when we die. We want that moment of full consciousness. So the famous saying, the revolution will not be televised. It means you got to show up. It's not a spectator sport. You don't get to participate, say you were there, unless you show up and pick up a cross and follow me, to quote Jesus. Unless you show up for the revolution, you don't get to claim you were there just because you saw it on TV. And so all these little mini circumstances that happen in our lives where we're forced out of our comfort zone, and it's clear this is the right thing to do. This is what I should be doing. This is how I should be serving. And you get to do that. That's a blessing. That's a pop quiz on the way to the final exam that is death. Helps you take your pulse, figure out where you're at. See how the course is going. See how your semester is going. See if you're on track or not. See what you need to work on. So, last week we had some guests come from a local yoga studio as part of their teacher training, and I just skipped giving class on the verses because the verses get just a wee bit unpleasant, these last verses of the chapter. We're on text 39. In text 38, Krishna says, prapashyadhibhi, by those who can see dosham, the fault of kula kshay kritam, of destroying the family. So why should we do that bad thing when we can see the fault, the dosh of kula kshay, of destroying the family? We can see the fault in destroying the family. Remember, Arjuna made a personal argument, I'm not going to be happy. And then he made a duty-based argument that wasn't just about attaining happiness, but it was about it's sinful and it's wrong fundamentally. And then he took that argument a little further and said, even if they don't see it, we see it, and therefore we shouldn't do it. It's a strong duty-based ethic. And now he's going to springboard off the term kula kshay, or destroying the family. With the destruction of the dynasty, kula kshay pranashanti, kula dharma, sanatana. The eternal family dharma is destroyed when the family is destroyed. That's pretty simple, right? If you kill the members of your family, then who's going to keep the dharma that your family upheld going on? If you kill all the doctors, then medicine dies. If you kill all the surgeons, then all the ability to perform surgery is gone. So, if you kill the family, then the dharma that the family did stops. Now, this is an old world Vedic view, which takes a second to appreciate. There's a whole thing of tarpan, of certain rituals are performed by the living members of a family, specifically the male living members of a family in a patriarchal system. And they perform those rituals forever, because each subsequent generation performs those rituals. And those rituals create a long line of continuity, very similar to what you'll find in a Native American tradition, where they honor their forefathers, or in Tengriism, like in the Genghis Khan's thing, with the eternal blue sky and the animism of that Mongolian worship. There's a sense, you find this in a lot of cultures, also in African spirituality, where you're connecting with your forefathers, also in Buddhism, especially if you look at honestly, in any of the varieties of Buddhism, to be honest, even Theravada for sure, in its southern recensions through Thailand and such, it's all ancestor worship. And if you go up into Tibet, you get it also in the Vajrayana system. There's a lot of ancestral worship going on. But anyway, it's a massive part of religion, that it's a way you connect with your forefathers who have passed on. Vikings talked about it. Everybody. It's like, this is part of the gig. Your ancestors are sort of there at the right and left hand of God, however you conceive of God. And heaven usually, even in Christianity, is conceived of as being a place where you go and you reconnect with your family. The Mormons do this. Everybody does it. You find it everywhere, and we're no exception. So there's this idea that you have your Kula Dharma Sanatan, your eternal family duties. And those duties hold up your legacy. Now there's the rituals, which will get mentioned in a minute, but there's just a general sense in which your dynasty is kept alive by the kings who rule today, by the people who keep your medical practice that you passed on to your children open, by the people that keep your corner store open. You open the corner store, you pass down to your children. If they don't keep it open, it closes and it's done. And then what you spent your life building it falls apart. So there's this idea that you do something and you pass on to your kids, and then they carry it on. They carry on your name. And there's a whole idea of carrying on your name. Your family name. You have to procreate, so the family name goes on. Otherwise the name dies out with you. You guys following this? Dharma nashta kulam kritsnam adharma pribhaviti uta. With the destruction of the dynasty, the eternal family tradition is vanquished, and the rest of the family becomes engaged in adharma. So there's Kula Kshai, the structure of your family, which then Kula Dharma Sanatana Pranashanti destroys Kula Dharma. And then when Kula Dharma is destroyed, then Adharma Abhibhavati. Then people become engaged in, or there's a rise of irreligion, Adharma. You killed all the elders, they don't instruct the juniors, and then the juniors just do whatever. They're not connected, they don't learn, they're not trained. You follow this? Then, when adharma is prominent, so that's adharma abhibhavat, from that adharma coming up, then pradushanti kula striya, the women of the family become corrupted. So now you got no good men around, you got no elders around, nobody's doing their dharmic activities, and then what happens? The women, it was a very common thing in that queens would kill themselves when their husbands, the kings, in their side of the equation if they lost in battle, then there'd be a mass suicide and all the queens would kill themselves. So they didn't get raped and defiled and tortured, what have you. They would just, they'd take some poison or something like that. Some cultures the women fought alongside the men, but not very often. And so there, there's this. I mean, even right now, it's going on in Ukraine. There's hundreds of reports of rape coming out of Ukraine. It's a genocidal thing. It happens. Sometimes certain cultures, they use it as a weapon of war. Also creates cohesion. If you have a military unit which is conscripted, which many of the Russians were conscripted into service, they weren't trained. So they've been forced to fight in the war they might not want to fight in. They're with a bunch of guys they don't know and trust. They don't have much cohesion in their unit and their fighting units, and sometimes they bond over doing really bad stuff together, and that's a way of proving your masculinity and proving your worth in the tribe, and then also creating some kind of a quick bond. Soldiers, this happens over a long period of time. Trained soldiers are much less likely to engage in this kind of stuff. But you find that, especially with untrained soldiers, new soldiers, young soldiers, who lack fighting ability, who aren't battle hardened, they do stuff like this. There's also just the desire to obliterate when you really hate the people you're fighting and you want to obliterate their bloodline. So you corrupt their bloodline by raping the women over and over again, trigger warning, till they get pregnant, and then they have your blood is what's passed on, and you've literally destroyed their bloodline. My homeland, Serbia, specifically Herzegovina, which is a Muslim area where Orthodox Christian Serbs live also, that my family was Orthodox Christian, a small enclave surrounded by Muslims on all sides. And the Slavic region was really rough because you had the Croats, which are all Catholic, you had the Serbs, who are Orthodox, and the Bosnians, who are Muslims, and they all lived in the same basic area. And so they've been doing this for centuries. These, the rape camps and stuff. It happened again in the 90s. This time the Serbs, my race, were the ones perpetrating these awful crimes against humanity. But they've always got a memory. They're like, yeah, but 50 years ago you did it to us, so we're getting you back. Everybody remembers this stuff. And so you come into power, and then you visit on the people who visited on you a generation before. You visit the same hell on them. It's like a very tribal, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, Hannibal-esque mentality. Obviously, I'm not endorsing it, but that's where it comes from. So yeah, whether it happens by force or it just happens because the ladies of your family move on, whatever it is, your lineage is destroyed, and they become part of another family. In the best of scenarios, and sometimes it's much worse than that. In the best of scenarios, they move on and become part of another family. So Arjuna's laying out this argument. Kulakshay, destroy the family. Kula dharma, the dharma of the family is destroyed. Then adharma abhibhavati, then adharma rises up. And then from that, you have kulastriya pradushanti, the women of the family become corrupted. Now, of course, the men of the family were corrupted, it says before. So it says they're engaged in adharma. Now the women are also engaged in adharma, but the men engage in adharma, there's just less at stake. Women engage in adharma, they start carrying babies, and then they have to raise those babies. So the stakes are bigger for women. Neuroticism is higher amongst women. And from a biological point of view, neuroticism would be more prominent amongst women because they have the stress of carrying children. And sex for them becomes a much more dangerous venture because they can get pregnant and they have to care for those children. And they have to also worry about those children, make sure those children are safe because they're the ones who are generally giving, nurturing and providing a home for those children. Like in most social mammal species, they're the ones who take care of the children. And so this creates a large amount of anxiety, which would be one biological reason why you see rates of neuroticism amongst women are much higher. Generalized anxiety, neuroticism amongst women are much higher than among men. Because they just, in general, carry with them these other concerns that men don't have. It's not like men are out of the woods. 99.9% of people who die in war are men, historically speaking. If you look at like the last 5,000 years, you add it up, it's 99.9% men. So that sucks. 78% of suicides, 93% of workplace-related deaths. So, it's not like men don't have their own cross to bear, their own difficulty. So I'm not trying to hate on women. I'm just trying to help you guys understand the logic and the mindset. And if you want to criticize, one way you can deal with this section of the Gita is just ignore it. Just consider it to have no value. We don't live in this world anymore. Women have equal rights now. Men should have equal rates of neuroticism. Men can become corrupted just like women can. Women can uphold family dharma just like men can. There's no reason why this is the only way society could be structured. It's not that Arjuna is making a point that this is the necessary way all societies are structured or must be structured. Rather, he's just saying this is the way our society is structured. So one way to deal with this troublesome section of the Gita is just to ignore it, just to consider that it's irrelevant. It's certainly fine. It's certainly a viable way of dealing with this. Another way of dealing with it is to consider that there may be some biological or basic physiological truth to this way of looking at the world. But it doesn't have to be like that. So it's not like that anymore. So one is, I don't like this. I don't like the patriarchy. Great. We're not telling you should. We're just describing the way it was then. Number two is, okay, there's some validity to this, but we can overcome. And we can make the world a better place. Great. No problem. Another way to view it is there's actually some legitimacy to this line of argumentation. Move fast. Another way to look at this, there's actually some legitimacy to this line of reasoning. That's another way to view it. Maybe not 100% like this, but on some level. There might be some validity and there might be some truth in this argument. But in any case, whether you view this as being an awful way to govern society or a legitimate way back then, but we can do better now, or there's actually some elements of this that are true in all circumstances. Whichever way you choose to view it, to some extent it's irrelevant because Arjuna's arguments ultimately weren't considered to be relevant by Krishna. And in a lot of ways, the entire Gita is an argument against this way of thinking. Excuse me. And so even if you don't like these arguments, great, Krishna doesn't appear to like them either, so no problem. Now, it does smack of kind of a casteist type society. All societies to some extent are casteist. You're born white. You got a silver spoon in your mouth already. Your parents went to college. Another silver spoon in your mouth. There's all sorts of ways in which, if your parents went to college, or your parents aren't divorced, there's all sorts of situations you're born into that just predispose you to having a leg up. I mean, here's a leg up. If you're born in the U.S., you have a monstrous leg up on 90% of the world. We have first world problems. Even the minorities in our country still have first world problems. We talk about like food security and missing meals and like how terrible that is, and no child should go, hungry, and they're eating like, cheap food, which is, hot, processed and really unhealthy. Yeah, okay. I've been around the world. I've done food relief all over the world. We break out free food in India. Thousands of people line up. Because that's all they're going to eat today, and it's a lot less work to go and wait in line for our food for a couple hours than it's to work all day to get food. And they're bringing like their own containers. And they'll take as much as we'll give them. Go to Africa, you distribute food. Like in Soweto. I've done food relief in Soweto, one of the poorest areas of the world, one of the worst ghettos in the world. Same thing. It's not like people are, they're hungry. I think the numbers, if I'm not mistaken, I believe 5 million children per year are stunted, which means they're going to grow up and be 6 inches shorter than they should be and be less intelligent than they should be because they actually don't get enough food. Not like, they have to eat bad quality food or they miss a meal, or like they actually don't get enough to eat, so much so that they lose IQ points and inches. I mean, you just look at areas of India where they eat rice primarily versus areas of India where they eat wheat. And there's 3-4 inches of difference right there. Because rice has no protein and wheat does. Much as we want to hate on gluten, only 1% of the world actually has celiac disease, and maybe 5% of the world is allergic. It's like in vogue now. But gluten's great. It's a wonderful source of protein that most people, 95% of people on the planet, or 99%, depending on how you want to define it, have no problem digesting. And so, you just being born in this country, you're like from a high caste. Even you're white trash in this country, like you're from like the worst areas of this country. You're still doing better than 90+% of the world. You won the lottery in the world. So we live in a segregated world, a segregated society where resources are concentrated in certain countries and available health care is concentrated in certain countries, and you have a way better chance at making it. And if your parents are married still, and if they are college graduates, it's like silver spoon after silver spoon after silver spoon. So you're going to find this kind of striations in all societies. So you can do whatever you want with this section. You can reject it entirely. That's what Krishna does. No problem. Krishna never goes back and goes, I think you have some really good points. He dismisses Arjuna's entire argument. Never comes back and really deals with it properly. Except to say, I don't agree and you should pick up your sword and fight. But he never deals with this specific argument. And so, you don't like this? You don't like the worldview this paints? Great. Krishna didn't seem to think it was that important either. And, this is thousands of years ago in ancient India. Hey, there's no slavery. They're concerned about women's rights. It's not the worst old world view I've ever seen. Or you think it has some value, but we don't have to live like this now? Cool. Good. It's fine too. Krishna considered it important enough to really even spend much time on it at all. So you're still in good shape. Or you think there's value in it? Okay, that's fine too. As a devotee, we still don't spend a ton of time here. We're focused on other stuff. From the degradation of womanhood comes unwanted progeny, Varna Sankar, a mixing of the Varnas. And so now you got people from any community getting people from other communities pregnant, and you start to get this kind of degradation of the guild system of the old world. An increase in unwanted population certainly causes hellish life for both the family and for those who destroy the family tradition. So everybody suffers. The dead forefathers suffer because the Dharma is no longer upheld. And the people who are part of those broken families suffer. And certainly that's true. Broken families, divorce rates. If your parents are divorced, your likelihood of going to jail, your likelihood of being a drug addict, all these things skyrocket. Your likelihood of not going to college, it just all skyrockets. What to speak of if your father was killed in a bloody battle and your mother was raped? You know what I mean? Like, what kind of burden is that to throw on a kid? Or your father was killed and then your mother went and hooked up with the guy who killed him. I mean, just any way you slice it. In these sort of war cultures where people are killing, whether they're raping or just taking the women, and they're Muhammad is famous. He married a Jewish girl named Isha. According to all the hadiths, she was totally happy to marry the guy who killed her husband. But whatever. Let's go with that. That's going to be rough on those kids. You follow? That's going to be rough on the lady, rough on the kids. I mean, talk about intergenerational trauma, right? The ancestors of such corrupt families fall down because the performances for offering them food and water are entirely stopped. That's that old world stuff I was talking about earlier. By the evil deeds of those who destroy the family tradition and thus give rise to unwanted children, all kinds of community projects and family welfare activities are devastated. So now we're no longer uplifting society and digging wells and helping people and uplifting our community. The whole world becomes a ghetto. Like when big industry moves out of an area and the community just dies. Because there's no more philanthropy going on. It's just the remnants of a. You see this in Detroit. Most people don't know this, but Compton, it's kind of a Detroit-esque community in Southern California. Compton, you guys probably don't know this history, but Compton there was a whole sharecropping thing where black people were taken advantage of all throughout the South. Post-slavery, during Jim Crow, they got sick of it. There was no way to get ahead. You farmed somebody else's land. They rented you the equipment. They told you how much they would pay you for the food you grew. And a lot of times after you grew food, you'd end up more in debt than you were before the season because they would pay you pennies on the dollar, couldn't sell to anybody else, and they charge you for the equipment, and they charge you for the land. And it was this perpetual cycle. I mean, unions, to a large extent, antitrust laws in this country were formed around this because coal mines were doing this to people, and they would rent you your equipment, rent you your house. They had the store that you would buy your food from. Everything was jacked up, and then they would just take it out of your salary. And sometimes you'd wind up owing money at the end of the month. after working 18 hours a day in the coal mine, sacrificing your health, getting black lung. So this happened in the South, and there was a mass exodus of black people moving from the South, either to the north or to the west, to live a better life, where the man could work and the wife could stay home and take care of the kids, and they could buy a home. We had the whole redlining thing where white people charge black people ridiculous, exorbitant rates of interest on their homes, and then repossess them over and over again, sold the same home over and over again by repossessing if you just missed one payment, and they wouldn't qualify for the federal guaranteed loans at the low interest rates, so they would get these awful predatory loans. That happened up until the 60s. But at least there was this promise out west that there was good jobs. And so World War II saw a lot of industry, defense industry contracts, building tanks and stuff like that, out here on the West Coast. You build out on the West Coast, put on boats, and boats go off to the Pacific. And then World War II ended, and all those factories got run by the automotive industry. And there was a lot of tire manufacturers and automotive industry type stuff going on in the Compton area. And so people moved out here, and then eventually that industry left in the 60s. Late 50s, early 60s, and that gave rise to the Watts riot, and that gave rise actually to the Crips and the Bloods. Once black people failed to fight for equal rights and equal pay for equal work, and then they stopped sort of just doing the general protesting, and they saw all their fathers and husbands get killed for protesting. There was a massive campaign to kill and jail black rights leaders in California and elsewhere, like with the Black Panthers. Then the next generation, or the people who watched that generation get killed off, they just turn to crime. Pays quicker, and they can't win anyway. And so the idea of community projects and philanthropy and putting back into the community and giving back and building schools and helping people and uplifting your neighbors and stuff like that, that stuff all goes away when the industry goes away, when the people who have the means to do that, they die off or they meet with misfortune, then all that stuff dries up and a community dies. So you got this kula kshay, killing the family, then kula dharma, pranashanti, is destroyed. The dharma of your family is destroyed. Then adharma abhibhavati, then adharma arises. Then when the adharma arises, kula striya pradushanti, the women of the family become corrupted. Then varna sankara, bad kids are born. Then from that varna sankara, then they stop doing all of this kula dharma, jati dharma. They stop doing all these welfare activities. They stop all the ritual, and everything goes to hell in a handbasket. And so if we participate in that towards somebody else, then we're ruining everything. That's the argument. That's the argument he's making. And again, just to wrap it up today, you got a few different ways you can deal with this. Either A, I don't like that system of government. Cool, no problem, doesn't really matter. Arjuna's insane, but he's having a panic attack and a midlife crisis and an existential crisis, all wrapped up in one. And so we don't take him too seriously. Krishna certainly doesn't. The entire Gita doesn't really deal with these arguments. So if you don't like this way of viewing the world, no problem. Krishna didn't either. Well, maybe that worked back then, but it doesn't work now. Yeah, that's fine too. If we're happy with you throwing it in the garbage can altogether, as Krishna seems to have, because he didn't address it at all in his arguments, then if you want to give some limited scope to appreciating historically, that's fine too. And you don't find any of this stuff you find in Jewish texts and Christian texts and Islamic texts, like straight slavery. Straight slavery is all over the Quran and the Torah. Like if you kill a slave, then you have to pay for it with this, and you can't beat a slave on this day. So I mean, it's just like You want to look at the worldview of those communities, which is way more recent than this stuff, and they just got all sorts of awful stuff. You got to figure out a way to jump around. And so 5 billion people in the world figured out a way to jump around it. So this stuff certainly shouldn't provide too much of an obstacle to you. And then there's the, wow, Arjuna's actually hit on the core of what it means to have a society. And we can see elements of what Arjuna's talking about even today. Okay? It's, that's fine too. And we find this kind of stratification and this necessity to uphold a society and what happens when a community is gutted and when people grow up without fathers. And so we can see this sort of intergenerational trauma playing out in our lives, the lives of people we know, in communities that we're a part of or that we know of. And that's okay too. The fact that Krishna doesn't spend a lot of time on this, or any time on this, for that matter, is the evidence that this stuff isn't critical to appreciate the Gita. And so obviously I find there to be some value in the Vedic worldview. I don't think it was all awful or all terrible, or everything we do in modern society supersedes this or is better than, or even that we've solved these basic problems. I think these basic problems are still there. I think if you look at the history of the U.S. or the history of the world, even in the last couple of generations, you'll find all of these elements still there. But whether you find my presentation compelling or that it holds water or not is wholly irrelevant, because it's not germane to the actual teachings of the Gita, which are about spirituality, which can flourish in any culture. Malcolm X is famous for saying that, there's... How can you speak of salvation and without freedom? First you have to have your freedom. Then you can, pursue higher topics. But that's not actually true. The promise of the Bible, for instance, the promise that the Bible held for generations of slaves in the U.S. was it independent. Let's see if I can find this here. I want to go ahead and properly quote Malcolm X. You can't separate peace from freedom, because no one can be at peace unless he has his freedom. That's the quote. I said salvation, but he used the word peace. I thought I got it wrong. You can't separate peace from freedom, because no one can be at peace unless he has his freedom. Well, we can forgive the misogyny, right? He doesn't even talk about women, but that's okay. We'll forgive that one. It was in the 60s, before gender-neutral language became a thing. I don't believe this, because otherwise all the generations of slaves that came before him that were deeply devout Christians and embraced Jesus with their heart and soul could never find peace. I don't believe it. I believe that spiritual peace, spiritual satisfaction can exist anywhere at all times, irrespective of your circumstances. I don't believe it depends on external circumstances. I think it's a right that no one can take away from you. I agree with Viktor Frankl, who lived through Auschwitz. Sometimes people are like, nobody had it worse than my people. Yeah, some people did. Sorry. Viktor Frankl had it worse than you. Sorry. He was in Auschwitz. His entire family was wiped out. You follow? Nobody can really compete with that. 1/3 of the Jewish population in the world was wiped out in a period of 5 years. Nobody can make that claim. And that happened just recently, 20 years before the Civil Rights Movement. I mean, the stuff that's happened in the world is ridiculous. So anyway, Viktor Frankl lived through Auschwitz, and he said he found the last vestige of human freedom, which is that no one can take away your ability to choose how you want to react to what life throws at you. I believe that. And so you get to choose if things are going to build you up or they're going to break you, if you're going to become a better version of yourself because of what you've been through, or a worse version. That's your power. And if you abdicate it, that's your choice. If you give over your power to somebody else, that's also your choice. And you can take it back anytime you want. It's always yours. If you choose to throw it away, it's always waiting for you. Anytime you choose to just switch that switch and take ownership. And so I fundamentally disagree with this statement. Now you could mold his statement that he's talking about spiritual freedom. But no, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. The meaning of the quote is clear. And so the Gita is about spiritual peace. It's about a spiritual choice. It's about decisions to get right with God. It doesn't matter what social structure you live in, where you are on the totem pole, where you are in the hierarchy, where the world is in its external circumstance. The Gita speaks about the inner world that you have access to at every moment, that you've always had access to, where you can expand and find peace and find growth without limit, and nothing can stop you. That's what the Gita focuses on. And so as we leave the Mahabharata and the Hindu milieu and the Vedic milieu, we're with Krishna and Arjuna. And we're talking about perennial subjects which exist no matter where you're living in the world, no matter whether you're a master or a slave or somewhere in between, what's going on vis-a-vis equal rights and what the climate is where you live and what the social structure is and where you live. None of it actually matters. None of the Gita's arguments, none of Krishna's arguments, none of his line of reasoning depends on this at all. It transcends it. It gets to the heart of the issue. Which is powerful, because normally you find religion gets mixed with political thoughts and this and that and the other thing. What you find with Krishna is, although this stuff is there as kind of the backdrop of the Gita, Krishna doesn't even touch it. Moves right beyond it. Gets to the heart of the issue. That Arjuna is the soul. Thank you very much, IGTV. Thank you guys on Facebook. Sorry I was late. Have a good night.